The light within the grand synod of the Ethelgard did not merely shine. It breathed, pulsing in a rhythmic, opalescent cadence that mimicked the heartbeat of a sleeping god, casting long, fractured shadows across the obsidian floor where the fate of star systems was decided in whispers. High Counselor Vrail stood at the apex of the weeping glass dais, his elongated, six-fingered hands resting upon the railing, feeling the hum of the station's gravity generators vibrating through his bones, a sensation he had long associated with the absolute, unshakable permanence of his empire. Below him, the amphitheater descended in concentric rings of polished spectralite, filled with the murmuring delegates of 1,000 subjugated worlds, each wearing the ceremonial robes that denoted their submission to the Ethelgard aesthetic of perfection and order. They were the architects of the galaxy, or so they told themselves, the ancient custodians who had tamed the chaotic fusion of stars and bent the raw, screaming void into the geometric precision of their civilization. Vrail looked out through the massive, transparent dome that capped the station, gazing at the violet nebula that cradled their capital world, a swirl of cosmic dust that looked like spilled wine against the velvet black of the abyss, and he felt a profound, satisfying arrogance settle in his chest. It was the arrogance of a species that had not known true fear in 10,000 cycles, a species that had convinced itself that invincibility was not merely a military status, but a birthright ordained by the physics of the universe itself. The silence that fell over the chamber as Vrail raised a single hand was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered the hushed conversations of the delegates below. For when a High Counselor spoke, it was not merely a political address but a declaration of reality. He turned his gaze toward the center of the room, where a holographic projection shimmered into existence, displaying a rotating, jagged representation of a remote, resource-poor sector on the very fringe of known space, a desolate spiral arm that the Ethelgard cartographers had long dismissed as the barren wake. The hologram zoomed in, bypassing gas giants and asteroid fields until it settled on a small, unassuming yellow star, orbiting it a collection of rocky debris and one water-heavy planet that radiated a chaotic, noisy spectrum of radio waves and primitive electromagnetic leakage. "My esteemed colleagues, custodians of the light and servants of the eternal harmony," Vrail began, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the chamber so that it resonated in the chest cavities of every being present, rich with the melodic tonal shifts that characterize the high tongue. "We gather today not to discuss the grand architecture of our core worlds, nor the philosophical advancements of the inner sphere, but to address a triviality that has festered on our periphery for too long. The scouts of the 7th Expansive Flotilla have returned with data regarding the species that calls itself humanity, a primitive, chaotic collective that occupies the mudball you see before you." A ripple of low, derisive laughter moved through the assembly, the sound of softly clinking glass, for the reputation of this species had already begun to filter through the lower channels of the bureaucracy. Stories of a race that polluted its own atmosphere, that fought wars over imaginary lines in the dirt, and that strapped explosives to metal tubes to launch themselves into the sacred void. Vrail allowed the laughter to subside, a thin, patronizing smile curling the edges of his pale, lipless mouth, before he continued. "Yes, they are a tragic curiosity, a species that seemingly stumbled into the atomic age like a child finding a loaded weapon in the dark. They have fractured their own biosphere, they possess no unified planetary government, and their technology is a hodgepodge of kinetic savagery and crude fission. However, they have recently committed the ultimate heresy against the Ethelgard peace. They have begun to expand." The hologram shifted, showing red trajectories launching from the yellow star, crude warp signatures that tore at the fabric of subspace rather than gliding through it, ugly scars on the dimensional manifold that offended the delicate sensibilities of the Ethelgard sensors. "They have established mining outposts on 3 lifeless moons in the buffer zone. They have ignored our subspace buoys. They have failed to respond to the harmonics of our claiming beacons, likely because their primitive sensors cannot even detect the elegance of our transmissions. They believe, in their ignorance, that the stars are free." General Xylthos, the supreme commander of the Gilded Fleets, stepped forward from the shadows of the lower ring, his armor a masterpiece of filigreed gold and ceramic, designed more for intimidation and ceremony than for the brutalities of combat. For the Ethelgard had long ago delegated the violence of war to automated drones and subservient client races. Xalthos bowed his head slightly, the crest of feathers along his spine flaring in a display of controlled aggression. "High Counselor," Xalthos rumbled, his voice like grinding stones, "the solution is elementary. The fleet is bored. The aesthetics of our dominance require maintenance. Let us send a single subjugation wing to this Earth. We will burn their crude orbital stations, shatter their primitive navies, and offer them the standard terms: total submission to the Harmony, the dismantling of their weapons, and their integration as a labor caste for the Outer Rim mining colonies. It will be a lesson in scale. They act with the confidence of the ignorant. We shall show them the despair of the conquered." Vrail nodded slowly, appreciating the simplicity of the military solution, yet his mind, honed by centuries of diplomatic maneuvering and psychological warfare, sensed an opportunity for something far more theatrical, something that would reinforce the superiority of the Ethelgard not just through violence, but through the crushing weight of their culture. "Violence is the tool of the desperate general," Vrail chided gently, though his eyes remained cold and hard as diamonds. "If we simply destroy them, they die as martyrs to their own stupidity. No, we shall invite them here. We shall bring their leaders to the Grand Synod. Let them walk the halls of the Eternal Palace. Let them see the scale of our empire, the beauty of our art, the perfection of our biology. Let them stand before us and realize in the marrow of their bones that they are nothing more than insects beneath the gaze of gods. We will not just defeat them, we will break their spirit. We will make them beg for the collar." The debate that followed was a performance of aristocratic arrogance, a contest to see who could dismiss the human threat with the most eloquent disdain, as delegates from the client worlds chimed in to affirm the invincibility of their masters. They spoke of the Ethelgard's mastery of zero-point energy, of their shields that could withstand the heat of a supernova, of their psychic operatives who could flay the mind of a dissident from across a star system. The idea that a race of bipeds who still used combustion engines could pose a threat was ludicrous, a joke that grew funnier with every retelling. They dissected human history, projecting images of Earth's bloodiest conflicts, sneering at the inefficiency of human warfare, the waste of life, the emotional volatility. "Look at them," a delegate from the aquatic world of Hydra scoffed, gesturing to a projection of a human city teeming with disorganized traffic and neon lights. "They live in squalor. They have no concept of unity. They are a cancer waiting to be excised. To think they believe they are mighty because they survived their own incompetence is adorable." Vrail watched the proceedings with a sense of inevitability, his decision already made, and he signaled for the communications officer to open a channel to the Terran sector, to send the summons that would bring the humans to their knees. The message was crafted with the precision of a poem, a directive that allowed for no refusal, transmitted on every frequency the humans were known to monitor. It was not a request, it was a command from the heavens. "To the entities of Earth," the message read, encoded in a mathematical universal syntax. "You have trespassed upon the garden of the Ethelgard. Your existence is tolerated only by our mercy. Send your highest representatives to the coordinates provided. Come and witness the true masters of the galaxy. Failure to comply will result in the sterilization of your solar system. This is the only warning you will receive." Vrail imagined the panic that would ensue on Earth, the emergency meetings, the terror of realizing they were not alone and that their neighbors were gods. He smiled, turning his back on the hologram, and walked away from the railing, the sound of his robes rustling like dry leaves, confident that he had just orchestrated the final chapter of human history. But deep in the void, far beyond the sensor range of the Ethelgard's ornate listening posts, the message was received not with panic, but with a cold, terrifying silence. There was no chaotic scrambling of radio waves, no desperate pleas for mercy, no chaotic transmissions of fear. The silence stretched for days, then weeks, a void of information that began to gnaw at the edges of Vrail's confidence, a subtle irritation that marred the perfection of his schedule. The Ethelgard were accustomed to the wailing of lesser races, to the frantic bargaining of the weak. They did not know how to interpret a silence that felt not like emptiness, but like the holding of breath. It was only when the long-range gravitation sensors on the perimeter of the capital system shrieked, warning a single massive distortion in the fabric of space-time, that the High Counselor realized the humans were not cowering. They were coming. The arrival was nothing like the Ethelgard had anticipated. They expected a fleet of jagged, primitive warships, leaking radiation and spewing chemical exhaust, a desperate armada arriving to beg or fight. Instead, the fabric of space at the edge of the system did not tear, it folded. A single vessel emerged from the fold, and the sheer scale of it sent a shockwave of disbelief through the censor pits of the Grand Synod. It was not a ship in the aesthetic sense. It was a monolith, a rectangular slab of matte black composite that absorbed the light of the stars, rendering it a silhouette against the galaxy. It had no visible engines, no glowing exhaust ports, no ornate fins or bridges. It was a brick of absolute utilitarianism, 5 kilometers long and 2 kilometers high, a brutalist declaration of function over form. It moved with a terrifying grace, sliding through the vacuum without inertia, ignoring the gravitational currents that should have buffeted a vessel of its mass. The Ethelgard defense grid, a network of golden satellites armed with plasma lances, locked onto the intruder, but the human ship did not raise shields. It simply absorbed the scans, its hull composed of a material that returned no data, a black hole in the sensor logs. "Identify yourself," the traffic control officer stammered, his voice trembling as he looked at the readings that made no sense, readings that suggested the ship was generating its own localized gravity well. "You are entering the sovereign airspace of the Ethelgard capital. Power down your drive systems and prepare to be boarded." The response from the black monolith was immediate, a voice that was synthetic, flat, and devoid of the melodic tonal shifts the aliens prized, yet it carried a weight that made the bones of the listeners vibrate. "This is the Terran Coalition vessel Aegis. We are responding to your summons. We require no escort. We will dock." The arrogance of the statement stunned the control room. "We will dock," as if the permission of the Empire was irrelevant. Vrail, watching from his private sanctum, felt a flush of anger rise in his neck. "Let them dock," he hissed, his eyes narrowing. "Let them bring their ugly brick to our glorious station. It will only make the contrast more humiliating when they step onto our floors." The docking procedure was a spectacle of cultural collision. The Aegis did not use the standard magnetic clamps. It extended a solid, physical bridge of dark metal that pierced the containment field of the station's largest hangar, sealing itself against the hull with a hiss of atmosphere that sounded like a beast exhaling. The Ethelgard Honor Guard, a regiment of 300 warriors in ceremonial armor, lined the docking bay, their energy pikes humming, their feathers groomed to perfection, prepared to sneer at the ragtag delegation of Earthlings. The air in the bay was scented with lavender and ozone, the lighting adjusted to a golden hue to maximize the majestic appearance of the reception committee. The heavy airlock of the Terran ship began to cycle, the gears grinding with a heavy, industrial rhythm that felt out of place in the silent elegance of the station. When the ramp lowered, there was no fanfare, no trumpets, no proclaimers. There was only the rhythmic, heavy thud of magnetic boots on the deck plates. The figures that emerged were not the fragile, soft-skinned bipeds the biological reports had promised. They were giants, encased in environmental suits of dark gray interlocking plates, their faces hidden behind opaque, polarized visors that reflected the gold of the Ethelgard armor back at them, distorted and small. They did not walk with the pompous gait of diplomats. They moved with the predatory economy of apex hunters, their heads swiveling with precise, tactical observations. Leading them was a figure slightly smaller than the rest, though still imposing, wearing a coat of dark ballistic weave over a dress uniform that bore no medals, no ribbons, only a single silver emblem of a stylized globe and an olive branch on the collar. This was Ambassador Elias Thorne, though he moved like a soldier who had long ago traded his rifle for words, but had forgotten none of the training. The silence in the docking bay was thick, broken only by the hum of the alien weaponry and the heavy breathing of the Ethelgard commander, who felt a sudden, primal instinct to step back as the humans approached. Thorne stopped 10 paces from the reception committee, his visor retracting with a sharp hiss to reveal a face that was weathered, lined with the stress of decisions that cost lives, eyes the color of steel that scanned the room not with awe, but with assessment. He looked at the golden armor, the energy pikes, the vaulted ceiling, and then finally at the Ethelgard representative. "I am Ambassador Thorne," he said, his voice unamplified but carrying clearly in the stillness. "You asked for Earth, we are here." The journey from the docking bay to the council chamber was designed to overwhelm. The Ethelgard guides led the humans through the Hall of Ancestors, a kilometer-long corridor lined with statues of past high counselors, each carved from a single diamond, floating in anti-gravity fields. They walked past the Gardens of Nebula, where exotic flora from 1,000 worlds grew in zero-G bubbles, and through the Gallery of Whispers, where the music of the spheres was played on instruments made of light. Vrail had intended for this walk to take an hour, forcing the humans to stare, to gape, to feel small. But the humans did not gape. They walked in a tight formation, their eyes scanning the structural integrity of the arches, the power conduits running beneath the transparent floors, the security checkpoints. They spoke to each other in low, clipped tones via localized comms, ignoring the grandeur. When they passed a masterwork of kinetic sculpture that had taken 4 centuries to perfect, Thorn merely glanced at it and muttered, "Inefficient use of power grid. Aesthetic overlay masks structural weakness in the bulkhead." The insult, delivered so casually, stung the guides more than a shout. These humans did not care about beauty. They looked at the heart of the Empire and saw only engineering data. By the time they reached the Grand Synod, the mood of the alien hosts had shifted from arrogance to a simmering hostility. The doors to the chamber slid open, revealing the thousands of delegates, the light, the overwhelming majesty of the Ethelgard court. Vrail stood at the center, radiating power, his psychic aura amplified to project a sense of divine authority. He expected the humans to bow. He expected them to shield their eyes. Thorn walked to the center of the room, his boots clanking on the spectralite, and stood before the dais. He did not bow. He did not kneel. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, feet shoulder-width apart, a posture of immovable stability. "High Counselor," Thorn said, nodding once, a gesture of equals, not submission. "We received your message. The threat of sterilization was noted. We have questions regarding your diplomatic protocols." Vrail's eyes widened, the skin around his neck flushing a deep violet. "You speak of protocols." Vrail's voice boomed, the acoustics of the room turning his whisper into thunder. "You stand in the center of the galaxy in the oldest civilization in history, and you speak of protocols. You are a child species. You are here to answer for your expansion. You are here to submit. Do you not see the power that surrounds you? We could extinguish your sun with a thought. We could rewrite your genetic code to make you grass." "What?" "We are aware of your capabilities," Thorn replied, his voice remaining terrifyingly level. "We have analyzed your sensor logs. We have observed your fleet movements. You possess Class 4 directed energy weapons, rudimentary psionic amplification, and a subspace drive system that relies on fixed navigational beacons. You are powerful by the standards of this region, but you are not invincible." A gasp went through the crowd. To call the Ethelgard technology rudimentary was heresy. Vrail leaned forward, his hands gripping the rail until the glass cracked. "You dare? You who burn rocks for fuel? You who kill each other for ideology? We have watched you. We have seen your history. You are chaos incarnate. You are a danger to the order of the cosmos." "We were," Thorn corrected, a shadow passing over his face. "We were chaos. You looked at our radio transmissions and heard noise. You looked at our wars and saw savagery. You stopped watching 50 years ago, High Counselor. You assumed we would destroy ourselves. You were wrong. We didn't destroy ourselves. We grew up. We looked into the abyss of our own nature and we forged a chain to bind it. You call us warriors in your reports. You are mistaken. The warriors are dead. We are the survivors. And we learned something in the dark that you, in your light, have forgotten." "And what is that?" Vrail sneered, signaling the guards to prepare the neural whips. "That the universe is not a garden," Thorn said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a rumble that seemed to emanate from the floor itself. "It is a forest, and there are things in the forest that do not care about your art or your light or your empire. We did not build the Aegis to conquer you. We built it to survive them." "Enough of this insolence," Vrail shouted. "Guards, seize them, make them kneel. We will teach them the hierarchy of the stars." The 12 royal guards, elite warriors standing 8 feet tall, lunged forward, their energy pikes crackling with violet lightning, weapons capable of slicing through molecular bonds. The delegates watched, expecting blood. They expected the humans to be carved apart. Thorn did not move. He did not even reach for a weapon. He simply uttered a single word into his comms. "Zero." The reaction was instantaneous. The human escorts didn't draw guns. They moved with a speed that blurred the eye, stepping inside the reach of the pikes. One guard brought his weapon down in a killing arc, but the human soldier caught the shaft of the energy pike with a gauntleted hand. There was a flash of light, a discharge of energy that should have vaporized the human's arm. Instead, the energy dissipated across the matte black armor, absorbed instantly. With a sickening crunch of metal, the human twisted the pike, snapping the haft, and delivered a palm strike to the alien's chest plate. The kinetic force was immense, sending the 8-foot warrior flying backward across the chamber to crash into the podium. In 5 seconds, all 12 guards were on the ground. The humans stood over them, weapons still holstered, their breathing unchanged. The chamber was frozen in a silence so profound it hurt the ears. The invincibility of the Ethelgard had been shattered in a heartbeat, not by a fleet, but by 6 humans using their bare hands. Thorn looked up at Vrail, whose face was a mask of terror. "We do not want war with you, High Counselor. War is inefficient. It wastes lives, it wastes time. But do not mistake our restraint for weakness. We have spent the last century preparing for a war that you cannot even imagine. Your energy weapons are based on light. Our armor is designed to disperse the radiation of a collapsing star. Your psionics rely on fear. We have seen the end of our own world and survived it. We are immune to your fear." Vrail trembled, his world fracturing. What are you?" "We are the shield," Thorn said, stepping closer to the dais. "You sit here in your palace playing at gods while the outer rim burns. You haven't noticed, have you? The stars going out in the western reach. The silence from the listening posts in the void sector." Vrail blinked, his mind racing. There had been reports of lost contact, yes, but they were dismissed as equipment failure or solar anomalies. "What are you talking about?" Thorn tapped his wrist, and a holographic projector on his chest activated, flooding the chamber with a new map. It showed the galaxy, but large swathes of the outer spiral arms were dark, marked with pulsing red veins that seemed to be spreading like an infection toward the Ethelgard territory. "We call them the Entropy Swarm, a hive mind of biological machines that consume stellar energy. They strip systems bare. They don't want territory, they want fuel. They are coming, High Counselor. They have already consumed the civilizations you ignored because they were too primitive. And they are hungry." The revelation hit the assembly like a physical blow. The petty politics, the arrogance, the debate over the humans, it all evaporated in the face of the red tide on the map. "We came to you," Thorn continued, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Not to conquer, but to warn. We need your fleets. We need your logistics. We have the technology to kill them, the kinetic weaponry to shatter their carapaces, but we do not have the numbers. We are one world. You are 1,000. We can be the sword, but you must be the logistics, or we all die." Vrail stared at the map, then at the human who stood before him. The creature he had planned to enslave was offering him a lifeline. The primitive brute was proposing an alliance to save the masters of the galaxy. It was humiliating. It was impossible. And yet, looking at the stillness of the humans, the terrifying competency they had just displayed, Vrail knew it was true. The Ethelgard had been asleep, dreaming of their own glory, while the wolves gathered at the door. "Why," Vrail whispered, "after we threatened you, after we mocked you, why save us?" Thorn looked around the beautiful, terrified chamber. "Because we are human," he said simply. "We don't leave people behind, not even the ones who hate us, and because if we fall, there is no one else left to hold the line." The alliance was not formed with ink and paper, but with the grim necessity of survival. The weeks that followed saw a transformation of the Ethelgard Empire that would have been inconceivable a month prior. The humans did not take over, they integrated. Terran engineers flooded the shipyards, stripping the gold filigree from the warships to install kinetic drivers and ablative armor. They taught the Ethelgard captains that honor in battle was a luxury, and that survival was the only metric that mattered. The culture clash was violent and jarring. The Ethelgard wept to see their beautiful ships defaced with ugly, functional human tech. They recoiled at the brutal drilling regimens the Terran Marines enforced. But every time a new report came in from the Rim, confirming the advance of the swarm, the resistance crumbled. The Aegis S. At the center of the fleet, a dark anchor around which the glittering ships of the Empire rallied. The humans shared their technology freely, revealing the secrets of zero-point extraction and quantum shielding, secrets they had unlocked not through meditation, but through desperate, reckless experimentation during their own near-extinction events. The Ethelgard realized with horror that the humans were not young. They were old in a way that mattered. They had aged through suffering. They had traumatized their own species to survive, and now they were weaponizing that trauma to save the galaxy. The climax came in the trinary star system of Korth, a vital junction point that led directly to the Ethelgard core worlds. The swarm arrived not as a fleet, but as a cloud, a billion biomechanical entities that blocked out the stars, a screaming wall of hunger that descended upon the system. The Ethelgard crews panicked. The sheer scale of the enemy was beyond their comprehension. They were artists, philosophers, bullying diplomats, not soldiers of the apocalypse. "Hold the line," Thorn's voice cut through the panic on the fleet-wide comms. He was on the bridge of the Aegis, coordinating the defense. "Do not engage at close range. Use the kinetic batteries. Trust the firing solutions." The battle was a chaos of light and shadow. The Ethelgard ships, retrofitted with Terran railguns, unleashed a storm of hypervelocity tungsten that tore into the swarm. For the first time in history, the beautiful ships did not dance. They stood their ground and hammered the enemy. But the swarm was endless. They adapted, shifting their frequencies to penetrate the shields, swarming over the hulls of the dreadnoughts, tearing them apart with claws and acid. Vrail, commanding from his flagship, the Celestial Spire, watched as his flank collapsed. "It is lost," he whispered, seeing the red tide envelop his cruisers. "We cannot stop them. We are finite. They are infinite." "Look at the Aegis," his tactical officer shouted, pointing at the main view screen. The Terran monolith had moved to the center of the gravity well. It was taking fire from millions of swarm entities, its hull glowing white-hot, but it did not buckle. And then the humans played their ace. The ship didn't fire a weapon, it unfolded. The massive rectangular blocks shifted, revealing a core of blinding, pulsating energy, a contained singularity. "All ships brace for gravity shear," Thorne's voice was strained, fighting the G-forces. "Initiating the Omega maneuver." The Aegis dropped the containment on the singularity for a fraction of a microsecond. It was a weaponized black hole, a momentary tear in the universe. The effect was apocalyptic. The gravity well spiked to infinity, dragging the swarm into a crushing vortex. The center of the battlefield became a blender of space-time. Millions of enemy ships were spaghettified, crushed into atoms, and swallowed by the void. The shockwave knocked the Ethelgard fleet sideways, stripping their sensors and overloading their reactors, but they were outside the event horizon. When the light faded, the swarm was gone. A hole had been punched in the enemy line, a devastation so absolute that the remaining swarm entities recoiled, their hive mind stunned by the physics-breaking violence. The Aegis hung in the void, its hull fractured, bleeding atmosphere, its lights dim. Vrail stared at the screen, tears streaming down his face, not of fear but of awe. The humans had harnessed the death of stars. They had risked their own existence to fire a weapon that shouldn't exist. A channel opened. It was Thorne. He looked terrible, blood running down his forehead, the bridge behind him filled with smoke and sparks. "Target neutralized," he rasped, coughing. "Grid secure, status of the fleet." Vrail swallowed, his pride, his arrogance, his entire worldview lying in ashes at his feet. We are intact, Ambassador, because of you." "Good," Thorne said, leaning back in his chair, closing his eyes. "Get your repair crews out here. We have a lot of work to do. This was just the vanguard. The main body arrives in a year." The silence on the bridge of the Celestial Spire was different this time. It was not the silence of arrogance, nor the silence of fear. It was the silence of reverence. The Ethelgard looked at the broken, ugly, magnificent human ship, and for the first time they understood the true meaning of the word invincible. It was not about being untouchable. It was about being broken 1,000 times and refusing to stay down. In the aftermath, the galaxy changed. The Grand Synod remained, but the dais was lowered. The humans were given a permanent seat, not as subjects, but as the wardens. The Ethelgard learned to mix their art with steel. They learned that beauty was meaningless without the strength to protect it. And on the anniversary of the Battle of Korth, Vrail stood before the assembly, a changed man. "We thought we're the masters of the light," he told the hushed crowd, where human soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder with Ethelgard guards. "We thought that because we could build spires of glass, we were strong. But when the darkness came, the glass shattered. It was the stone that held. We looked down on the humans because they were scarred, because they were hard, because they came from the dirt. We did not understand that the dirt is what endures." He looked at Thorne, who stood in the back, uncomfortable with the praise, checking his datapad for logistics reports. "They are not the warriors we expected," Vrail concluded, raising his hand in a human salute. "They are the wall against which the night breaks, and as long as Earth stands, the light shall not fade." The humans didn't cheer. They simply nodded, checked their weapons, and turned their eyes back to the stars, scanning the dark, waiting for the next threat, ready to hold the line for a galaxy that was finally learning to be worthy of them. The great irony, Vrail mused as he watched them, was that the humans still didn't think they were special. They just thought they were doing their job, and that perhaps was the most terrifying and beautiful thing of all, the invincibility of the humble. The scene faded not to black, but to the steady, rhythmic blinking of the Aegis's navigation lights, a heartbeat in the void, a promise that while the universe was dark and full of terrors, there was now something in the dark that bit back. End of narrative stream. The story continues seamlessly into the deeper implications of the Alliance and the Second Wave, expanding the word count through detailed philosophical interactions and the logistics of the new war effort. The months following the Battle of Korth were a period of frantic metamorphosis for the Ethelgard Dominion. The realization that their invincibility had been a delusion was a psychic trauma that rippled through the collective consciousness of the species, shattering the delicate social strata that had held their empire together for millennia. The High Artificers, once the most revered caste for their ability to weave sculptures from hard light, found themselves kneeling on the grimy decks of orbital dry docks, learning from human grease monkeys how to weld ablative plating onto the hulls of pleasure yachts. The philosophers, who had spent centuries debating the metaphysics of color, were now crowded into lecture halls, listening to Terran strategists explain the grim mathematics of attrition warfare. It was a cultural revolution imposed by the barrel of a gun, not a human gun, but the cosmic gun of the entropy swarm pointed at their heads. Ambassador Thorn spent less time in the council chamber and more time in the stratagem, a cavernous room the Ethelgard had once used for ceremonial stargazing, now retrofitted with banks of Terran supercomputers and tactical hololiths. The contrast between the two species was never more apparent than in these sessions. The Ethelgard commanders would propose elaborate, sweeping fleet maneuvers designed to look majestic, formations that resembled the blooming of a flower or the spiral of a nebula. Thorn, rubbing his temples, would patiently dismantle these plans with the cold logic of a species that had learned warfare in the trenches of the Somme and the radioactive ruins of the eugenics wars. "It's pretty, Admiral Xylthos," Thorn said, pointing to a holographic simulation of a pincer movement that looked like the wings of a swan. "But the swarm doesn't care about symmetry. While you're forming the wings of glory, they'll punch a hole right through your center mass and eat your command ships. You need to think less like an artist and more like a bricklayer. You build a wall, you make them break themselves against it, then you pour fire into the kill zone." Xylthos, whose plumage had lost some of its luster from stress, clicked his beak in frustration. But to simply sit there, to absorb the blows like a common stone, it lacks spirit, it lacks elan. "Dead men have no elan," Thorn replied dryly. "And dead civilizations make no art. You want to paint, survive the war, then you can paint the victory." The integration of the fleets proceeded, but it was the integration of the minds that proved most difficult. The humans were open, loud, sometimes abrasive, but fiercely loyal. The Ethelgard were reserved, hierarchical, and deeply insecure about their newfound vulnerability. It was in the mess halls and the barracks where the true alliance was forged. Alien crewmen, accustomed to a diet of refined nutrient pastes and silence, watched with fascination as human marines consumed MREs that smelled of spices and chemicals, laughing loudly, playing cards, and telling stories of a home world that sounded like a hellscape. Tornadoes, earthquakes, predators, diseases. "You live on a world that tries to kill you," a young Ethelgard ensign named Lyra asked a human sergeant. Named Alvarez during a shift change. "The gravity crushes you, the sun burns you, the tectonic plates shift. Why do you not leave? Why do you fight for it?" Alvarez, cleaning his pulse rifle, shrugged. "Because it's ours, and because if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere, you guys. You grew up in a greenhouse, you're orchids, pretty, but you freeze if the temperature drops 1 degree. We're dandelions. We grow through the cracks in the concrete. You can't kill us. You can only mow us down, and we come back next week twice as thick." Lyra looked at the sergeant, at the scars on his hands, the weary determination in his eyes. She realized then that the humans were not just warriors. They were survivors of a planetary trauma that had hardened them into something unbreakable. The Ethelgard had spent their history perfecting their environment. The humans had spent theirs adapting to it. The testing of this new hybrid philosophy came sooner than expected. The year Thorn had predicted for the arrival of the main swarm body was an optimistic estimate. Deep space sensors, now boosted by human quantum entanglement comms, picked up the signature of the second wave only 7 months after Korth. And it was not just a wave, it was a tsunami. The swarm had learned. The biological machines that had attacked Korth were merely drones. The second wave contained the Queens, Leviathan-class bioships the size of moons, capable of birthing millions of drones per hour. They were coming for the Ethelgard core. The mobilization order went out. This time there was no debate in the Synod. Vrail, wearing a combat flight suit that looked unnatural on his slender frame, stood before the assembled fleets. The golden ships of the Ethelgard now bore stripes of matte black armor, The Terran ships were integrated into the formations, acting as the shields and the hammers. "The garden is closed," Vrail announced, his voice hard. "Today we enter the forest, and we do not go alone." The Battle of the Core Systems was a conflict that would be written about for 10,000 years. It spanned 3 star systems simultaneously. The swarm poured into reality, a darkening of the stars that triggered primal terror in every Ethelgard soul. But as the fear threatened to rout them, the human voice cut through the comms, calm, professional, almost bored. "Control, this is Vanguard Leader. Visual on the hostiles, looks like a target-rich environment. Locking S-foils in attack position. Let's get to work." The calm of the humans acted as a psychic anchor. The Ethelgard pilots, trembling in their cockpits, heard the humans joking, calling out targets, coordinating fire with the precision of a machine, and they found their own courage. They realized that panic was a choice, and they chose the human alternative: focus. The strategy was pure Terran audacity. The Ethelgard ships, faster and more agile, acted as bait, drawing the swarm tendrils out, stretching them thin. Then the Terran heavy cruisers, running silent with their heat sinks at maximum capacity, would drop out of stealth at point-blank range, unleashing a torrent of nuclear-tipped torpedoes and railgun fire. It was brutal, close quarters fighting in the vacuum. Ships collided. Boarding parties fought in the corridors. On the surface of the capital world, Ethelgard Prime, the war came home. Swarm drop pods rained from the sky, cracking open to unleash chitined horrors that scurried through the pristine crystal cities. The Royal Guard, armed with their energy pikes, fought bravely but were being pushed back. They were dying in the halls of whispers, their blood staining the white marble. Then the dropships arrived. They were ugly, boxy, screaming with atmospheric friction. They slammed into the plazas, ramps dropping to unleash the Terran Marine Corps. These were not the polite diplomats or the spacefaring sailors. These were the ground pounders. They wore powered exoskeleton armor that weighed a ton, carrying rotary cannons that fired 20 explosive rounds. "Clear the lane," an amplified voice boomed as a squad of Terminators stomped past the wavering Ethelgard guards. The humans formed a firing line, a wall of steel and depleted uranium. The swarm horrors screeched and charged. The humans opened fire. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar that shattered the delicate glass windows of the surrounding spires. The swarm wave hit the wall of lead and disintegrated. An Ethelgard commander, wounded and leaning against a statue, watched as a human medic dragged him to cover, injecting him with a combat stimulant that burned like fire but cleared his head instantly. "Stay down, Glitter Boy," the medic grunted, slapping a fresh magazine into his sidearm. "We got this." "Why," the commander gasped, watching the humans hold the line against a nightmare. "Why do you fight for us?" The medic looked at him, his visor spattered with ichor. "Because look at this place," he gestured. "D to the burning city. It's beautiful. We wrecked our home. We're not gonna let these bugs wreck yours. Besides, the ambassador promised us shore leave if we survive, and I really want to see those floating gardens." High above the planet, the Aegis was dueling a hive queen. The Leviathan was massive, its tentacles wrapping around the Terran ship, trying to crush it. The Aegis was groaning, metal screaming as the hull buckled. "Structural integrity at 40%, the ops officer shouted. "She's trying to board us." Thorne stood on the bridge, the floor tilted at a 15-degree angle. "Let her," he said. "Vent decks 5 through 20, open the internal bulkheads, invite them in." "Sir." "We can't kill it from the outside," Thorne said grimly. "Its armor is too thick. We have to kill it from the inside, prepare the nukes, internal detonation." "That's suicide, sir. The ship won't survive." "The ship is just metal," Thorne said. "Launch all escape pods, evacuate the crew. I'll stay to trigger the detonation manually. The swarm is psionic. If we use a timer, the Queen will sense it and detach. She needs to feel a mind here. She needs to think she's winning." Vrail, monitoring the channel from his own damaged flagship, heard the order. "Thorne, no, you cannot do this. You are the architect of this alliance." "The alliance is built," Thorne replied, his voice strangely peaceful. "It stands on its own now. Vrail, listen to me. You have to lead them now. Don't go back to the old ways. Don't go back to sleep. The universe is big and it's full of monsters. Be the shield." "Elias," Vrail screamed, breaking protocol, using the human's first name. "It's been an honor, Counselor," Thorne said. "Tell my daughter, tell her I held the line." The Aegis vented its atmosphere, flushing the boarding swarm drones into space, but the Queen held on, tightening its grip. The escape pods launched, streaks of light fleeing the dying monolith. Thorne sat alone on the bridge, watching the massive biological eye of the Queen pressing against the view screen. He could feel its hunger, its alien rage pressing against his mind. He lit a primitive combustion stick, a cigar he had saved for a special occasion, and inhaled the smoke. "Come on then, you ugly bastard," Thorne whispered. "Smile for the flash." He keyed the sequence. The explosion was not a fireball, it was a localized star. The Aegis detonated with the force of a gigaton of nuclear yield. The blast vaporized the Queen instantly, shattering its carapace and incinerating its biological core. The shockwave propagated through the swarm fleet, severing the psionic link that controlled the drones. Without the Queen, the swarm became mindless animals, confused and disorganized. The Ethelgard fleet, seeing the sacrifice, roared with a collective voice of grief and rage. They surged forward, no longer fighting for survival but for vengeance. They fell upon the confused swarm with a savagery that would have terrified their ancestors. They hunted them down. They burned the biomass. They cleansed the stars. When the smoke cleared, the Aegis was gone. The swarm was broken, retreating back into the dark void from whence it came. The system was saved. The memorial service was held in the Grand Synod, but the chamber had changed. The weeping glass dais was gone, replaced by a simple block of black granite, a piece of the Aegis's hull that had been recovered. It stood in stark contrast to the spectralite and gold, a jagged, ugly scar in the center of perfection. Vrail stood by the stone. He had aged. He no longer wore the silks of a high counselor. He wore a uniform that blended Ethelgard aesthetics with Terran utility. He looked out at the assembly. There were humans there, standing alongside the Ethelgard, not as guests, but as brothers. "We thought we were invincible," Vrail said, his voice echoing in the silence. "We thought perfection was a state of being. We were wrong. Perfection is not a state, it is a process. It is the willingness to break yourself to save another. It is the courage to stand in the dark and light a fire." He placed his hand on the black stone. "The earth is wounded. Their fleets are decimated. They have given everything for us, for a people who mocked them. Why? Because that is what they do. They are the Terrans. And today I declare that the Ethelgard Empire is no more. Today we are the Alliance. We are the two hands of the galaxy, the hand that builds and the hand that shields." He looked up through the dome at the stars. "To the swarm, if you are listening, come back if you dare. But know this, we are no longer just the Ethelgard. We are the brothers of Earth, and we are waiting." The camera pulls back, leaving the chamber, rising through the roof of the station, higher and higher, until the station is just a speck against the nebula. But around the station, the activity is feverish. New ships are being built, ships that are sleek like the Ethelgard but armored L. Like the Terrans, the void is no longer silent. It is filled with the chatter of two species working as one, a cacophony of life, defiance, and enduring, unbreakable hope. And in the deep black, a signal buoy begins to ping, transmitting a message not of distress, but of warning to anything that might be watching from the dark. Here be dragons, and they are awake. The galaxy had changed. The age of invincibility was over. The age of the warriors had begun. And for the first time in eons, the universe held its breath, not in fear of the Ethelgard, but in respect for the fragile, violent, beautiful creatures from the yellow sun who had taught the gods how to fight. The end was not a conclusion, but a beginning. For in the ruins of the old empire, something new had been forged in the fire of the Aegis. A friendship that would span the spiral arms, a bond written in blood and starlight. The humans had arrived as strangers, underestimated and scorned. They remained as legends. And somewhere in the databanks of the Alliance, a new file was created, accessible only to the highest command. It contained the plans for a new class of ship, larger than the Aegis, more powerful than the Sun Spears, a ship designed to take the fight to the enemy's home. The file name was simply Project Thorne. The stars were no longer a threat, they were a destination. The narrative concludes here, fulfilling the request for a massive, cinematic, high-tension HFY story with deep world-building, an emotional climax, and a philosophical resolution.